Gang Territory, Chapter 4, Part 2. As we filed silently into class, the other pupils were all looking sideways in my direction while pretending they were looking at something else. Their expressions were curiously enigmatic, not smiling, yet almost. They reminded me of that famous painting, the Mona Lisa, by Leonardo da Vinci. They evidently knew something that I didn't know. An uncomfortable feeling of foreboding began to grow in my chest. Once arrived in class and standing by my desk, I felt even more uncomfortable because, with all that had happened, I had not been to pee since just after the mid-morning break. It would not be for another hour at least till I would get a chance, unless I asked for special permission. But special permission twice in one day was a bit much by anyone's standards. Could I hold on until the break? As always in this kind of situation, as soon as one becomes aware of a slight discomfort, it gnaws away in the conscious mind, slowly growing into an overwhelming obsession. I tried, therefore, to concentrate on what was happening outside rather than inside my body. Huffy gave us permission to sit, and, covered by the noise this made, Molly leaned towards me and whispered solicitously, "What happened to your face?" "Whippy branch," I whispered back. "It's nothing." Huffy glanced over in our direction. "No talking in class," she said severely. Then she looked at me more closely. "Boy, come here," she commanded. Then repeated Molly's question. "What happened to your face?" I gave her the same answer. "Whippy branch." She looked mystified. "From the hedge," I explained, which, although misleading, wasn't a lie. Her face cleared as she grasped my meaning. "Let me have a closer look," she said, and suiting her action to her words, grasped me by the shoulder to turn my face to the light. I gasped, winced, and crouched as a sharp pain shot through my bruised ribs on the left. "What's the matter, boy?" she asked, but it was more of an exclamation than a question. "Hold still, can't you? And stand up straight. I'm not going to hurt you." I didn't doubt her good intentions, but she had already hurt me quite a bit. Even so, I stood still as commanded. I didn't want it to get around that I'd been injured. I didn't want to give the slug and his associates that satisfaction. Huffy turned my head this way and that in the light of the window. I suffered her attention stoically. "Only superficial," she pronounced finally. "Lucky it didn't get you in the eye. Look where you're going in future. All right, you can sit down now." I walked slowly back to my place, giving a wink to Winifred as I went. I noticed Katie trying to signal something to me, but wasn't able to work out what it was. I suppose she was thanking me for my intervention on her behalf just before dinner, but I had the feeling, all the same, that there was more to it than that. There was no time for any further surreptitious exchange of signals, because Huffy kept our heads down by giving us an English lesson, a dictation. It was a story about a crow, a fox, and a piece of cheese. It was just starting to get interesting, and I was beginning to forget the discomfort in the region of my bladder, when we were interrupted by a knock on the door. It opened, and a small girl came in with an envelope in her hand, which she passed to Huffy. She then stood waiting in case there was a reply. All our eyes were on Huffy. She tore open the envelope, looked at the paper inside, nodded, and said to the girl, "Okay, you can go now." The girl left. Huffy lifted her head to look directly at me. She wore a serious expression. I felt an uneasy something rise up in the region of my stomach, as though I wanted to vomit, but couldn't quite bring it up. "The headmistress wants to see you immediately in her study," said Huffy slowly and clearly. "Go out quietly and shut the door behind you. The rest of you get on with the dictation." All eyes followed me to the door. Those of Katie looked agitated. I slowed as I passed her desk. "Don't tell she mouthed silently and pleadingly. "Don't tell, please!" I gave her a slight nod of understanding and went out, shutting the door softly behind me. In the empty corridor, I leaned against the wall to collect my thoughts. This could be a simple administrative matter, I tried to reassure myself. Confirmation of address, former school attendance, or something of that sort. But it didn't seem probable. More likely it concerned the slug and our confrontation of 2 hours ago. But he wasn't in hospital, not even seriously hurt. I had just seen him lined up to come into school. And what was Katie so agitated about? What was it that my nod to her committed me not to tell, and why? Would she be in trouble with her parents if they knew she'd been involved in a brawl? This made a lot of questions, but no answers. The only way to find out was to go and knock on Miss Hangar's door. I went softly and reluctantly down the corridor. I stood hesitantly before the door a moment, then knocked firmly and resolutely. It was opened at once by the large woman who had shaken her fist at me as I retreated towards the street. So it was about the slug and company. My heart sank. "That's him!" cried the large woman. "That's the one what done it!" "Thank you, Mrs. Crawley," said Miss Hangar calmly. "Come in, please," she said to me, "and stand by my desk there," indicating a small free space on her right. "Would you please shut the door, Mrs. Crawley?" Creepy's mother did so, and sat down on a straight chair facing Miss Hangar's desk. On the other side of the doorway stood the slug, Slim and Creepy. The slug had a look on his face as though he were in pain, although he hadn't been wearing this expression shortly before in the yard. Slim and Creepy were looking sardonically triumphant. Creepy's mum seemed to have it in for me, but I hadn't touched her precious son, only kneed the slug. Miss Hangar turned to me. "I've received a serious complaint from Mrs. Crawley, the school caretaker, that you made a vicious and unprovoked attack on her son Harold here, and on his friends Sidney and Timothy, also present. What have you got to say?" "It was not unprovoked, Miss Hangar," I replied, looking her unwaveringly in the eye. "They were—" I broke off, not knowing how to continue without implicating Katie. "They were what?" asked Miss Hangar. I appreciated the fact that she was trying to give me a fair chance to explain, but what could I say? "They were doing something I didn't approve of," I said at last lamely. "It were a vicious, unprovoked attack," broke in Mrs. Crawley again. "He come rushing out the school gate and—" Miss Hangar cut her off. "Thank you, Mrs. Crawley. You've already given me your version." She turned back to me. "Now, tell me, what was this something you didn't approve of?" Mrs. Crawley's intervention had given me time to see the hopelessness of my position. I couldn't say anything without telling everything, and that meant letting Katie down. I lowered my gaze. "Nothing," I said in reply. "Nothing?" queried Miss Hangar. "You mean they were doing nothing? Why then did you attack them? I suppose it was you that attacked them, and not them you." "Yes, Miss Hangar." "Yes, what?" she insisted. "Do I understand that it was you who attacked these three? Mrs. Crawley tells me that you came straight out of the school gate and charged them without giving any warning. Is this true?" "Yes, Miss Hangar, it's true," I said weakly. Miss Hangar shook her head. "I don't understand. Why did you do this? There are 3 of them, and 2 of them are much bigger than you are. Did you have assistance, or were you alone?" I hesitated. I had to think about this question. I wasn't quite alone. Katie was there. Did her presence count as assistance in the sense of Miss Hangar's question? I thought not. I was about to answer that I didn't have any assistance when Mrs. Crawley answered for me. "He's a dangerous child," she cried, and glared at me. "Attacking my Harold and his innocent friends like that. He ought to be shut away." "Mrs. Crawley," said Miss Hangar quietly, "it is I who am responsible for the children under my care in this school. If I consider that the case warrants it, I will bring the matter before the school board. As it stands, I am not satisfied that all elements of your complaint have yet been brought to light. I would like to hear what your son and his 3 companions have to say." She turned to Crawley. "It's your mother who has brought this complaint. Now, what have you to tell me about what happened?" Crawley was just too eager to give his version. "Well, miss, we was just standing there when he comes rushing out at Sidney here. He knocks him down, and all of us with him. He kicks him on the jaw, laid him out he did, and then runs off before we could catch him." "What were you doing when he came rushing out?" asked Miss Hangar. "Nothing, miss," cried Creepy. "What do you mean by nothing?" persisted Miss Hangar. "You must have been doing something. What was it?" "No, miss, we wasn't doing nothing." "And were you injured?" asked Miss Hangar. He looked to his friends for help, but they hadn't prepared a collective reply. "No, miss," he answered finally. "Not even when he knocked you down?" Crawley looked confused. He hesitated. "He knocked Sidney down," he replied at last. "You said he knocked all of you down," persisted Miss Hangar. Crawley looked even more confused. His mother came to his rescue. "He's a good boy," she said. "He just don't want to get him," she indicated me with a contemptuous toss of her head, "into too much trouble. The poor lad's covered with bruises all over." I drew in my breath with a gasp at this lying hypocrisy. "What about you, Simmons?" Miss Hangar turned towards Slim. "Are you covered with bruises all over too?" Slim tried to squirm out of this one. "He hurt me, miss," he complained. "Where did he hurt you, Timothy?" Timothy was nothing if not cunning. "I'd rather not say, miss." "How did he hurt you? Did he punch you?" "Yes, miss, he punched me," he lied. "Did he kick you?" "Yes, miss, he kicked me," he lied again. Miss Hangar pushed her interrogation further. "Did he punch you and kick you many times?" "Oh, yes, miss, many times," he confirmed, not perceiving the trap into which he was being led. Her trap closed. "And what were you and the others doing while he punched and kicked you many times?" Slim suddenly realized his danger, but couldn't escape it. "Nothing, miss," he said earnestly. "Truly, we wasn't doing nothing." "I believe your words, Timothy," said Miss Hangar with precise irony that I appreciated, but that completely escaped Slim and his pals. They thought that Slim's story had been accepted. Miss Hangar turned to the slug. "Now, Sidney, you're the one who's really been injured. What's your version of this affair? Did he really knock the 3 of you down, then knock you out? Why, you're a head taller than he is, and much heavier. Did such a small fellow really do so much damage to 3 big lads like you?" "Yes, miss, it was him what done it." She turned to me. "Do you confirm what he says?" "Yes, miss, what he says is true." She then said, with a hint of a twinkle in her eye, "There are a number of elements in this story that are far from clear to me, but what is clear is that there is a good deal more to you than meets the eye." She swiveled back to address all of us. "I want you 4 boys to come forward and stand in front of my desk." We did so. Miss Hangar spoke to us severely. "I am not going to tolerate any kind of violence or fighting in or around the school. Is that clear?" "Yes, miss," we answered in chorus. "I want you to give me your word that there'll be no more fighting." "Yes, miss," they said. I remained silent. Miss Hangar turned to me. "Do you give your word too?" "I can't give my word to something I can't guarantee. All I want is to be left alone, but if I'm attacked, I'll defend myself." Miss Hangar looked at me curiously, and then put her question differently. "Do you give your word not to start any fights?" "I'll do my best not to start any fights," I said. "All right, I'll accept that. Now, I want you to shake hands, and we'll put the whole thing behind us. Would that be acceptable to you, Mrs. Crawley?" Mrs. Crawley nodded, though her expression indicated that she held certain reservations. "Shake hands," she instructed. "Then you can go back to your classes." The Slug, Creepy, and Slim shook hands between themselves in a congratulatory manner, then held their hands stiffly out towards me with a leer. I put my right hand behind my back. "Shake hands," commanded Miss Hangar. I shook my head. "I'm not shaking their hands," I replied stubbornly. "Why, Harold's not good enough for him, is that it?" sneered Mrs. Crawley. "If he sets out after my Harold again, it'll be me what he has to deal with." "Mrs. Crawley," said Miss Hangar with rather laboured patience, "please remember that the person responsible for maintaining discipline in this school is the head teacher. Should there be any further incidents concerning your son or any other pupil, I would be grateful if you would kindly bring them to my attention, as you quite correctly did today, and refrain from taking any independent action which may be contrary to the overall policy of the Ministry for Education or of the Board of Governors. I thank you for your cooperation." She contrived to smile at Mrs. Crawley, while at the same time maintaining her air of authority. She returned her attention to me. "This is your last chance," she said sternly. "If you don't shake hands, I'll have to punish you." "Then I accept your punishment," I said stoically. "I'll not shake hands with any of them until I'm sure I can trust them." "Very well," said Miss Hangar. "You'll stay in after school for an hour for the rest of this week. I'll write a note to your aunt explaining why." She turned to the other three. "You can go back to your classes now. Mrs. Crawley, unless there's something more you would like to say, you may leave too." Mrs. Crawley looked as though there was a great deal more she would like to say. Even so, she got up without a word and moved towards the door. I started to follow her. My need to visit the privy was becoming extremely urgent. "Shut the door, please," said Miss Hangar to me, "and come back and stand by my desk." I did as she instructed, although my intention was now seriously elsewhere. Miss Hangar peered at me over her glasses, an interrogatory expression in her eyes. "Why wouldn't you shake hands with them? It would have saved a lot of trouble and avoided your punishment." I reflected a moment. To tell the truth, I wasn't exactly sure myself why I had refused. Finally, I had it. Just before the war, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain shook hands with Adolf Hitler at Munich, then came back to England promising peace in our time. But Hitler was not to be trusted. Would you shake hands now with Hitler and Goebbels, with Himmler? Miss Hangar looked at me with questioning eyes. "Was it really that bad?" she asked softly. "Bad enough. Do you feel you can tell me about it now?" I must admit I was tempted, but I remembered my unspoken promise to Katie and shook my head. "Do you really have to write to my aunt? She doesn't get home from work till 7, and I'll be there long before that." A jawing from my aunt was the last thing I wanted. First day at school, too. "I'm afraid I do. It's the rule. Go back to your class now. I'll give you the note for your aunt before the end of the afternoon. Be sure you deliver it." I closed the door of her study softly, went outside, and set off across the yard in the direction of the privy. My business there was now of the utmost urgency. Inside was an absolute solitude, somehow amplified by the buzz of the flies. I undid my trousers whilst eyeing the wall speculatively. How high could I pee? Could I get over the top? I carefully judged distance and elevation, then fired. The jet was at first encouraging. It impacted about 8 inches from the top, but then gradually faded to descend lower and lower. I stopped the flow again, took careful aim, and squirted. Once again the first impact was encouragingly high, but very soon began to descend, this time more quickly than at first. I tried various jets and configurations, but with little improvement. Finally, my supply of precious fluid nearly exhausted, I contented myself with sketching a few stunted flowers and bushes. All in all, I was not displeased with my attempt at the wall. With practice, I felt sure that it would be possible to succeed. I began to plan in my head how I could practice secretly at home. I took advantage of the place and the solitude to examine my ribs. Letting my short trousers fall to my ankles, I hoisted up my shirt to examine my midriff. It was worth the examination. The final scene in a classical western, where the hero rides off into a technicolor sunset, had nothing on the glorious end-of-the-day colours that encircled my ribs. The sunset was most colourful on the left-hand side, where the slug's right fist had done the most damage, and there, exactly in the place where the sun would have been slipping below the horizon, was a curious kind of lump that hadn't been there when I got dressed that morning. I touched it gingerly. It was hot and extremely tender. Probably just a swelling from the bruises, I said to myself. I pulled up my trousers and tucked my shirt tidily inside them. I made sure my flies were all correctly buttoned, and then walked meditatively out of the privy towards the school porch.